first seminar when we talked about what data is and that the need for pre-processing or preparing the data for mining before we start the actual algorithm. Pre-processing was a step, the dimensionality reduction is a step in pre-processing. So here is the data that's in the form of a table or a data matrix. There are 5 attributes in here. Or 5 dimensions. That is, the columns of the data are the attributes or dimensions or features. These are the descriptions of the objects. The objects themselves are on the rows. So the idea here is if certain columns or attributes are not relevant to our analysis, we want to remove them. We want to remove them because that would speed up the processing and will reduce the computational complexity. Here's another one. It has transaction ID, refund, marital status, taxable income, and the decision attribute, yes or no, the class attribute, the red one. So we want to determine the class. Are any of those relevant to the class? If they're not relevant, like the transaction ID is not relevant to the class, we can remove it from here. That's called dimensionality reduction. Back in let's review one of our first seminars. We talked about pre-processing. We talked about the machine learning process that includes a number of steps like creating or collecting the data, selecting sampling sizes, and then doing pre-processing, that is preparing the data for machine learning or data mining or data analysis algorithm to run with this data. We do need to do preparation. We do need to do pre-processing because the data mining or machine learning algorithm expects the data to be in certain format. Let's say I want to have the class attribute on the end, that red one that we have seen. It doesn't want to have any values that are null values, or it's expecting the values are numerical because it wants to compute a distance or do some comparison with them. So we might need to transform the values from categorical to numerical. We might need to normalize the values if some of them are too big. compared to all the others. They might skew the average, So we need to do transformations, normalizations, and as well as find the important attributes. So this is where we come to dimensionality reduction, because if the attribute is not related to determine the class, we want to remove that attribute. If it is not important, it needs to be removed, because if it's sitting there, it just creates computational complexity and slows down the processing time for this algorithm. So that's why we have seen back in one of our first seminars about dimensionality reduction that it's part of pre-processing. Once we're done with all of these things, the red data is ready for the machine learning algorithm. Select the data mining task, or select the machine learning method or algorithm that we want to run. Go ahead and run the algorithm, extract the knowledge, that is obtain the results. Then we can test the knowledge and the result to see the accuracy. Let's say if it was a classification method, it will come out with some accuracy, 70%, 80%, 90%. In order to determine the accuracy, we need to do some testing. Once the result is obtained and we have tested it and it's accurate, we can do some post-processing to refine the knowledge. We can, let's say, too many results are discovered, thousands and millions of pages of results. We can do some summarization, or we can determine which are the essence, the most important, the most actionable, the most interesting, whatever we want to do, and only provide those to the user. So refine the knowledge. Transform and the representation, we might do visualization and in order to decide how to represent or present this knowledge to the user. Going back to unsupervised learning, we have seen this picture back in one of our first seminars. What is clustering? So, are these things clusters of similar cells? These are biological data. We have seen some data here that was giving us medical real-life data of patients of cancerous cells. We were trying to determine what makes the cell cancerous. We have found the number of nuclei, the color of the cell help us to determine whether it's cancerous or not. So those descriptions are used for that particular data analysis task. Here we have 4 clusters of cells. The yellow, the orange, the green, and the violet. Are they similar? Yes, they're similar because they're close to each other. All the yellow ones are next to each other. This means the values are similar. They all have one nucleus and a light color. You see, that's what makes them similar. So these are actually the healthy cells. They don't have any cancer, these yellow ones. Now, when they hit a dark color with 2 tails and 2 nuclei, they are actually cancerous cells. So they are over here. All these orange ones are similar and grouped together by the clustering algorithm because they have the same properties. They have a dark color and 2 tails and 2 nuclei as well. So that's what clustering does. It just places similar items that have similar properties, attributes, or descriptions into the same group. Alright, let's see like the actual other things that are unsupervised learning are association rules. We will look at those into the next class. But these are unsupervised learning, machine learning methods. Right. So the dimensionality needs to be reduced because of large data. Even if the data is small, dimensionality reduction will help us greatly. But if the data is big, it is actually critical and crucial, because if we don't do it, we might never finish processing. The algorithm might fail because of the size of the data, would take unreasonable amount of time or never finish. In that situation, dimensionality reduction is critical for the data analysis. Okay. So let's look at the dimensionality reduction techniques. So there are many databases that are huge, especially the ones that are multimedia databases are very large in size. What does this mean that they're multimedia? This means they contain multiple medias. Like they might contain sounds and videos in addition to text. So time series analysis, images and videos will be multimedia databases category. If we want to determine which objects are similar or close to each other in this kind of multimedia database, we would run into the what's called cursive dimensionality. This means the more attributes or columns that we have, the longer processing time and the more difficult for the algorithm to finish running, and if it's too many of them, it can completely choke the algorithm. So that's why dimensionality reduction is very important. There are several algorithms designed to determine which attributes are important to the study and eliminate the ones that we don't need. So the main idea is to reduce the dimensionality of the space, project d-dimensional points into a k-dimensional space so that k is less than d. We have some mathematical formulas and some algorithms that will allow us to determine which attributes to keep and which attributes to remove. One of those methods is called multidimensional scaling, and we have a formula here to compute stress. Another one is called embedding. Given a distance matrix, embed objects in k-dimensional vector space using a mapping. So that one just provides a formula to map objects from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional space. Let's say we want to map them from 3D to 2D. And the last method that we have here is called Gemini. It uses contradictive property called lower bounding lemma, which shows that we can use the index in lower dimensional space to retrieve the exact answer for our query. So there are certain methods that exist there that would allow us to decide or determine which dimensions to remove how we're going to reduce our dimensionality. And these are 3 of them. So now let's look at clustering. How the algorithm works. Let's look at cluster analysis. What is cluster analysis? We have already seen several visualizations of objects or points into space. Plotting them or visualizing them into a 2-dimensional space is the easiest. We just have the x coordinate and the y coordinate, and the point ends up in specific location because of the value that it has for the x attribute and the value that it has for the y attribute. All the others are plotted in the same way. They're just placed in the location for whatever their values for x and y. Now this 2-dimensional space, 2D. Now if we want to have 3D, we have x, y, and z coordinate. And in that case, same thing. We are still computing the distance between the points. But instead of computing 2 attributes, we would be computing 3 attributes because we have 3D, 3-dimensional space here. So this point will be plotted here because it has certain value for x, certain value for y, and also a value for d. For z, the 3rd dimension. So z is the actual depth. Is the depth. Are they more to the front or more to the back or in the middle somewhere? This is like if we're gonna compute the size of a package to ship it over the mail, and they are asking what is the size of the box. We have to measure the length, the height, and the depth. So that's what we have here, length, height, and depth. And that's why a certain point ends up in specific location because its values for those 3 coordinates, x, y, and z, or 3 dimensions. Now, once we have plotted those like this, the points in the 3D space, what we'd like to do is we already explained is we will take initial centers of those points, compute the distance to the initial centers from any other points onto our database. Whichever center the point is closest to, it is placed into that cluster that has that center. Once all the points are placed into the cluster, we recompute the center by taking the average of all the points' values. That might be a real point that actually has those values, and then it'll become the center of this cluster, or it could be a value that doesn't belong to any point. It doesn't matter. We still use it as the center of that cluster, as the centroid. And from there on, we go into the second iteration of this k-means clustering, where again, all the points into our database are computed their distance to the cluster centers. The centers will change as we add more points because we take the average of all the points as the center. If they change, we need to go to the next iteration. Once again, the algorithm will stop or converge when these centers no longer change, or they change very little. So, why do we need cluster analysis? What it can be used for? So it creates groups of related documents for browsing. For example, group all the web pages in the world based on what they're talking about. What are they for? Groups of genes and proteins that have similar functionality. This is from the human genome. Groups with similar stock market options or stocks that have a similar price fluctuations. Summarization, we will reduce size of a large data set by taking only the most important, the essence. As we mentioned earlier, classification is not related to unsupervised learning or clusters, but we can examine the clusters and try to assign them a class or a class label. Here we have a number of clusters here. How many clusters do you see? Do you think that there are 8 or are they more here? On the first picture they look to me like there's 2 of them. Kind of like the red ones here are here and the blue ones are here. Now on the second picture, because of the colors, it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clusters. So how many there are? That's why the algorithm doesn't know this, but the user space to provide the number of clusters that they want to create. So there are 2 types of clustering. There is partitioning clustering, or divisive. That is, k-means is like that. And then there's a hierarchical clustering, where the clusters actually overlap with each other or they're nested into each other as a hierarchical tree. This is partitioning, first type, like the k-means. And this is the hierarchical, where they do overlap. Alright, so that is all that we have today for dimensionality reduction and cluster analysis.